Hi, everybody. So I'm back, and I am actually going to quickly change this here so that I can actually hear properly. There we go, because I have a little bit of an echo going on. So I'm back, and I finally have some proper battery stuff and all that kind of jazz. I actually wanted to talk a little bit about something that those of you that grew up in the 80s in Detroit, of which I wasn't, is pretty important. And for those of you that actually have given really that grew up watching MTV and that sort of thing would, might not give any consideration to. And this is actually really interesting, a really interesting story. And there's a YouTube channel which I'm going to plug, Lance Rosal's YouTube channel. He has a lot of stuff on this that you can watch, old broadcasts of it. But today I'm actually going to talk a little bit about Back Porch Video. And Back Porch Video goes back to the early 80s, early mid 80s in Detroit. So Tanya Sherko has been a long time friend of mine, going on 20 years now, and actually probably more than 20 years, come to think of it. And back in the MTV generation, and even before, I would say, the idea of at that time, the idea of having music programming was new. So the concept of just from a strictly broadcast history perspective is unique. At that time, there wasn't really any such thing as the concept of just having all music all the time on a channel. Now we take this for granted. Not that MTV has a whole lot in terms of music on their shows anymore, but at that time, that was new. There was no such thing. Same deal with the ESPN in the late 70s. There was no such thing as 24-hour sports or a channel that was nothing but sports. And so too was the case with MTV. And one of the pioneers of music programming, particularly on cable, which you might not expect, would have actually been Back Porch Video. And that was actually part of Westinghouse's Group W, which is quite a large provider at that time. And what is significant about Back Porch Video is not just that it was one of the very first music only broadcasts. And this, I don't know if it predates MTV, but it certainly would have been around that time. It may well. I'll ask Tanya and a few other people that were involved with it, and they may be able to tell me. But it was certainly MTV was not super 100% mainstream yet. It was certainly would have been gaining traction. But again, the concept of all music broadcasts is new. But what's also interesting is that this is actually a program that was done by high school students. And that was sort of unique, particularly at the time. Again, not that unique now, but at the time, it was a huge deal. And the kind of brainchild of that was a guy named Russ Gibb. And he was well known in the Detroit music community. He had quite a large music palace, so to speak, and he used to bring in all kinds of major musical acts. And then he was a school teacher, so he was sort of the cool teacher type. And he sort of had this thought that, well, you know what, I have a bunch of really cool students, and it would make a lot of sense to set up a television studio and then actually teach the kids how to do their own broadcasts and just kind of let them rip. And that was a huge thing at the time. There wasn't really any such thing. And so the Back Porch Video kids, if you want to call them that, had a lot of notoriety. So they had the first sort of MTV style broadcasts, and that was new. That was absolutely new. And they produced and did these broadcasts entirely themselves. And a lot of the people that were involved with that, this would have been at Dearborn High School in Detroit. And what ended up happening was a lot of people from this program ended up going to work at major networks. A bunch of them wound up at Nickelodeon. One of the writers actually wound up doing Batman, and there's just an endless stream of people that got their start on Back Porch Video. And this is particularly interesting to me because I also started in broadcasting right out of high school. So in this case, in my case, it would be the late 90s. So it was still relatively uncommon at that time to be a high school student and wind up being able to essentially walk yourself into a job, an internship slash job where you're in control of the product. In my case, I was working at CGOH, which was a CTV affiliate at the time. It's an O&O station now, and at the time they were at 1500 Maryville Road. And if you're American, you will know CGOH, if not by name, but you will know them because that was actually where You Can't Do That on Television was conceived and created and filmed for years and years and years. It was a CGOH owned show. They had a division called Carlton Productions where they did a lot of syndicated programming, which Skycron does now. That's actually where I cut my teeth in television. I was there. And so it's interesting to me the kind of parallels because growing up I didn't know about Back Porch Video. I was the youngest at the station and I was doing commercials and pretty much everything that they needed to fulfill their programming requirements at CJOH at that time. And that was very uncommon. And I was shooting primarily in Studio A on the ground level. And I was writing and producing and doing all this stuff, similar to the way the Back Porch Video guys were doing it about probably 10 in the 10 to 15 year corridor before me. And it's also worth noting that the Back Porch Video setup had gone on for quite some time. So it was actually still going on in the early 2000s. So this is where it's really sort of interesting. But at the time, as I say, in the 1980s, there was no, this was the idea of music was new, just having nothing but music was new for TV. And basically the concept of giving a bunch of kids a TV studio and say, here, go make your own show, that was unheard of. That was unheard of at that time. And so from an American broadcasting historical standpoint, Back Porch Video is extremely significant because it provided a lot of the talent that now have gone on to, fairly major meteoric heights, although I suppose if it's meteoric by its very extension with that kind of verbiage, it is major. And I wanted to show a couple of short little clips of, I found a really interesting clip on Lance's YouTube, so hopefully he won't mind. Again, should fall under fair use. I try not to show too much because it's copyrighted content, and I'm also a producer, so I don't really feel like having any issues with my YouTube channel. But I think in this case, because friends and friends and friends involved, and I'm just going to show some short clips. This is some stuff that I thought was pretty interesting. I found a clip of, my brain's not working. I have 3 different monitors here, so yeah. So there was a really interesting. I found an interesting clip of Russ Gibb because he also had his own little cable access TV show, and I found a very interesting clip with David S. Goyer. And he was one of the writers for Batman and a bunch of other very, very major productions. So it's interesting to see him here really, really young. He would have probably just gone, he was probably still a university student at Michigan at that time. And you can tell just from the way that Russ Gibb is in these clips, he really likes kind of championing these young guys, and that really reminds me a lot of Max Keeping when I was that age and he was championing me. And you know what? There's not a lot of these guys anymore, right? You have to pretty much be an expert right out of the gate. That isn't to say that you shouldn't know what you're doing. You should. But there's a point where somebody has to say, you know what? You're talented and I think you can do this. And given the right circumstances, I believe that you really could make something, but I'm going to give you the opportunity and the resources so that you can get some experience, because it's a sort of catch-22. you need experience to get work, but how do you, get work without experience? And so these types of guys really kind of make it possible for all of us to do what we do, because somebody has to take a chance on you when everybody else is saying no and saying, hey, you know what, I think you've got something, but you don't have the cameras, you don't have the equipment, you don't have any of the stuff that you need to have sufficient access in order to do this. And so I believe in you, so I'm going to do it. So take a look at this quick clip here of Russ Gibb with David Goyer. I'm just going to play it for a second. It's kind of fun to see this.
Actually, they are, but this was only by mistake that I happen to have this one.
By mistake? It's a purple sweater. You look like one of those grapes in that ad for grapefruits. What? Oh, Fruit of the Loom. Yes. DSG. Is that yours?
Those are my initials. They're also mine.
So it's interesting to see this sort of
so you have one of her
here.
sweaters on.
Right.
Things are funny in California, aren't they?
Things are funny, yeah.
Ann Arbor, Michigan.
God,
David,
he's so
you
young.
go to the University of Southern California.
And it's weird.
How did that happen?
It's weird
I mean,
looking
why
at clips
there?
of
Are you in
yourself when
film?
you're that
Yeah.
young. I've
What
seen
part?
some stuff too.
Filmic writing.
What did you call it?
Filmic
And to
writing.
think
Filmic
what,
writing?
Brand new
what
word.
David
Filmic.
ended up.
Right.
It sounds like
moving
something you put
to.
on a cut
It's
or an
just,
abrasion.
Well, someone said if you're a sports writer, you're not a sportic
I think
writer,
it's
so
pretty
why are you
cool,
a filmic
Filmic.
in
writer?
my opinion.
What does a film writer do? I mean, we know he writes films, but how do you go to school to write that?
So
this
yeah, I
is
mean,
basic
these
writing,
are
isn't it?
things
that's a subject of great debate
these are
at
things
USC right
that
now.
that you don't really think about when you're watching TV. You figure, oh well, they just fell into it, and in some cases that's true, but I don't know if David Goyer was a member of Back Porch Video. He honestly probably was, but I will have to check. But some of these other clips are really interesting. The problem is when you have so many of these fucking monitors, it's really hard to keep on top of it. Oh, and the other cool thing about Back Porch Video is because they had the notoriety that they did, they got some pretty major acts at that time that really kind of dug what they were doing. And consequently, that also gave them more attention as well. So just to give you an idea, I mean, they got Inks, which was a major band at the time, and they're there doing an interview, and they did it on Back Porch Video. Now, one of the things that I always thought that should have happened is I felt that one of the affiliates at the time probably should have run the show, because the other thing is the production standards of the show at that time were quite good. You don't have weird lighting or strange angles or bizarre cuts and weird Chiron being, the graphics. You don't really get a lot of this sort of the shaky production values that you would expect to have of somebody that was in high school. The productions were quite polished, and you can see this. I mean, just to give you an idea, I mean, and here's a little bit of the interview with Inks that Back Porch Video did on their show. I mean, this is, in my view, this is pretty remarkable.
The new album compared to your old ones?
I mean, imagine being a high school student.
I feel strongly.
I like it.
I like it.
I like it a lot.
I like it a lot too.
We all do.
Imagine being a high
We
school
enjoyed making it.
student
It was
in
How long did it take from
early
start to finish?
mid
the longest
maybe
that we've
late
ever
90s.
taken.
Oh, it was.
But because we had weekends off.
And
It was very
that-
They're made for
civilized.
Michelob,
They're-
I guess. Eh?
Yeah, that's right.
doing stuff like
No,
this.
we
and
well,
getting
in
major
fact, we spent a
acts
lot
like
of time
Inks, I mean,
really
that's
making
nuts.
sure the songs would work and
And
down to the point where
that really comes
maybe
from
they all work on
having
acoustic
somebody,
guitar. They're sort of they're all very simple and recorded
It
quite
really comes
straightforward.
from having somebody believe
And
in you.
and sort of shows. And then
you
when
have
we
to
do
have-
them, we do them.
You have to have somebody give you your shot, because if somebody doesn't give you your shot, then you never really have the opportunity to make the kinds of to get the kind of experience to make these shows. You have to cut your teeth, and I feel like there's too many circumstances where there's too many people that are saying no. I mean, you don't want to say yes to everybody because it's not special anymore, but you do want to kind of give a shot. So whenever you have somebody that's able to kind of look past the fact that you're 14 or 15 or 16 or whatever age you are, that's a big deal. And I'll tell you, I wouldn't have wound up getting into television if I didn't have Max Caping. And a lot of these guys that were doing the Back Porch video at Dearborn High in Russ Gibbs' class, many of them would not have had the opportunities that they had to work in television and in media had they not had access to the equipment. I mean, now it's a lot easier because you can get the equipment and you don't need a huge amount of outlay. You can get shit on Amazon, in a cheap Chinese camera from AliExpress. And if you're willing to fuck with it, the quality is exceptionally good. You might have to do stuff, but you can get to the point where something is presentable and it looks good on television, right? But in the 80s and the 90s and even up until probably the mid 2000s, that if you wanted something that was broadcast quality, that was a tall order. You needed an outlay of a lot of equipment that was quite expensive. So if you didn't have access to a TV studio, you didn't have access to the gear. And if you didn't have access to the gear, then you didn't have the ability to actually do anything or gain any experience. And you could do the cable access thing, I suppose, to some degree. But if you've got some little big man syndrome type dipshit that has been volunteering there for however many years and saying, don't touch it, that's not going to help you, right? That's not going to help. So what do? You need access to the gear, you need access to the kit to go out and make stuff, and you need to learn a cut, and somebody needs to show you how. It's not just how do you use the stuff. Well, how do you cut? How do you use an A/B deck? Like, how do you take a Betacam SP or a U-matic and synchronize two decks? How do you do a cut? How do you use Chiron so that you can get graphics on the screen? I mean, again, really easy now with After Effects and all kinds of, cheap and even free options that you can download. But at that time, that didn't exist. You needed access to a studio and you needed access to the equipment in order to be able to do that. And so you have a couple of hurdles, or you had a couple of hurdles at that time, which again is what makes the Back Porch video guys, folks, all the more remarkable, because first of all, you got to get the equipment. You have to have access to the gear. And it's not just a couple of, you need all the gear that you need in order to have a sufficient technical quality. We're not even getting into the artistic and the talent stuff yet. Just having the shit so that you can go make it. Just make it. Just learn how to make it. And then you have to learn how to get good at it. You need to learn how to become proficient technically so that you know how to make the equipment do what you want. So you need to know how to light, and you need to know how to white balance, and you need to know how to set up the camera so that you know how to set up a shot. You need to know how to back focus. If it's multicam, you need to, I'm going to have a punch-in shot, and I'm going to have a wide shot, and I'm going to have a medium shot, so that you have something that you can cut with 3 cameras at the same time, right? Just the basic stuff like a triangle setup, and don't go over the axis and all that stuff. Just basic, the technical stuff, and then just basic film and television grammar, accepted film and television grammar. And then on top of that, once you get to the point where you can operate the shit and get it to at least do what you want in the sense that it doesn't look bad, now you have to get to the point where artistically you're able to make it look good. Not just look good technically, but look good and as polished as possible. And I think that is what is so remarkable about these guys. They did get access from somebody that believed in them, a guy like Russ Gibb, who spent a huge amount of time schmoozing and all of this to get the equipment and get the gear, and really built and really managed to build a real little. He built a studio. The kids built a show. They built careers on it. And if they didn't have somebody believe in them, it just wouldn't have happened. And I think there's a lot of nostalgia for those that were involved in Back Porch Video, and there's certainly respect throughout the industry for those that were there at that time. I was a little too late to the game because for a couple of reasons. One, I'm not from Detroit, right? So I wouldn't have gone to Dearborn High. But it's interesting because of the parallels. And my friend Tanya often tells me, there's a lot of parallels between, because I knew Tanya at the time when I was in high school, and I had just started working at CGOH. And she, was like, hey, there's a lot of parallels between what you're doing now and Back Porch Video. And I didn't really think about it at the time because I was, 15, 16, 17-year-old kid. And when you're 15, 16, 17 years old, everything is so serious, right? And you're trying to kind of find your way and figure out, and things are serious. It was probably why movies like The Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink and 16 Candles and the Ferris Bueller's Day Off and all these kinds of movies really resonate, and they still do, and kind of have a twinge of wistfulness of people in that generation for that reason. But for me, I was kind of in my own little world. I wanted to do television, and I had my opportunity. And you don't always think about it. Well, when you're a conceited youth, right? You don't really think about the specialness of what you're being offered and the opportunities that you've been offered until after. And usually that happens one of two ways. One, you have opportunities that you were given, and in your arrogance, you didn't take it. And then you kick yourself in the ass after, which I have done many times. And I think we can all relate to that to some degree. And the others are things that you don't really think of the significance at the time because you're just kind of in your head, right? You're in your own head, and you're doing what you need to do, and you're a teenager, and you're serious, and oh my God, I have one shot, blah blah blah. But you don't think of the specialness of it. And I was reading a book on the Royal Canadian Air Force. And I mean, if you're not from Canada, you wouldn't know who they were. I mean, you might if you were on the border. But anyway, there's an Englishman, part of the well, actually, he was a Welshman. So make sure I have British family, still in England, so I better make sure I don't mix the two up. But yeah, no, he was a Welshman, and he'd come to Canada, and he played a number of very popular characters in the show. And in this biography of Air Force, there's a quote from John Morgan where he's talking about, I guess he and the cast was reminiscing from their younger days. And he goes, when you're younger, you think that there's a ton of opportunities and that if you miss one, it's no big deal. You'll have lots of opportunities to make it big, but you might only get the one. And it's interesting to see the reflection of that sentiment, because had I not seized the opportunities that were available to me at CGOH, I would not have wound up doing what I ended up doing after. And have I achieved everything I want? Fuck no, absolutely not. I always want to have more stations. I want to get more shows on the air. I want to do bigger and better shows, and get some more sponsors and sell some more advertising. And when you achieve something, you want to appreciate and be proud of what you've achieved and recognize what you've done. That's sometimes hard to do too, because sometimes the sort of the practice of gratitude, right? Because sometimes you go, holy fuck, I only have these markets and I want this market and they won't pick up the phone and blah, 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 blah. But you got to go, hey, man, you're not even from this country and you've got like 20 market. You've got 20% US TV households. And, that's pretty good. That doesn't mean, see, you have to kind of sometimes step back. And I often, have to remind myself that I need to kind of step back and, and go, hey, you know what? That's pretty cool that I did this, because it's not easy and there's not a lot of other people doing it, particularly younger people. And but that doesn't mean that you don't keep pushing. It doesn't mean that you don't keep trying to push the envelope. And I enjoy doing what I do. I enjoy working in sports broadcasting. I like going and hanging out with athletes. And I mean, I'm an athlete too, not at that level, but I enjoy doing it. I've always been a Syracuse Orange fan, which you can clearly see from my gear. I'm usually wearing Syracuse Orange, and if you look around my office, my home office, you can see that I've got Syracuse posters everywhere. So I am orange collar. I am a Syracuse man, which which is funny because the show's quite popular in the South, and a lot of my friends that live in the Southern 48 often tease me, in Tennessee and Georgia and that, and they always kind of poke fun at me. So, who do you think's gonna do it in March Madness? You think you're Syracuse? But again, it's there's so much going on these days that sometimes it's hard to kind of take a step back and kind of look at what you've done and then realize that somebody gave you the opportunity, that somebody gave you a go. And I was fortunate enough that I was given a go when, people didn't have to. And I think it's remarkable that not just because, oh, well, you've got young people and blah, 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 like the Back Porch video kids were. But you know what? It didn't end up being, oh, here's a bunch of kids that are trying to make a TV show. They really made something out of it, and they got a lot of attention, and they had major acts that were coming into Detroit. And they even ended up having the odd broadcast on WXYZ, which is the one of the major stations there. So this is one of those things that I think people need to remember. It's not, oh, this is a kid's show and blah, blah, blah. They are creating something that doesn't look like it's almost professional or not quite there, and oh, isn't this cute? They did, like, it's a fully professional, fully slick, fully 100% professional production. And if somebody didn't give them that opportunity, it's like, they're a bunch of kids. They're a bunch of kids. They don't they can't do anything. Kids don't know anything about TV. Well, nobody knows anything about TV or any skilled vocation until you're given an opportunity to work within it. And this is one of the reasons that I think it's so important to kind of highlight. And on top of that, the idea that they were doing music all the time programming for television. And as I say, that's not common. That wasn't, it is now, but it wasn't at the time. It was revolutionary, right? MTV was revolutionary. The idea that you had a visual representation of almost these little mini movies, that was really the whole VJ thing. That was new. And not only were these guys young, but they were on the cusp, and they were responsible for helping, if not largely establishing, the visual lexicon for what we would consider now just sort of the normal state of being for music broadcast. So, yeah, just a little thing that I kind of wanted to, one of those things that I really just kind of wanted to bring up, because I think it's important. So yeah, that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about today. And if the reason that my eyes are drifting is I'm just trying to I'm trying to what I need to do is I need to I need to figure out how. Oh, it's right here. I have a Stream Deck, but the Stream Deck is set up to my laptop, and I don't actually have it set up on my big machine, which is what I'm on right now. And I am in the middle of transitioning my main. I'm in the middle of transitioning the big machine to my main streaming from home machine, because then I can have the Stream Deck software on both. So when I go and I have to do a live stream or a live broadcast somewhere, I can take the Stream Deck with me because my MSI laptop just recognizes it and knows it. But I also, for 90% of the time, when I'm broadcasting on location, we're using hardware, and I generally don't use OBS other than to take stream from the switcher, as opposed to when I'm live streaming like I am from now. My earpiece is falling out like Beyonce. Uh, you know, it is, you know, I'm going to be using OBS at home where I'm going to have all my sources through OBS, so the Stream Deck is a little bit more important. Right now, my Stream Deck is just sort of loose here, and I need to kind of configure it on my big machine. And there goes my earpiece, but that's okay. I'm done anyway. So yeah, please do subscribe to this channel. I've noticed a lot of you have been watching the video game streaming, and of course, Go Nitro free episodes come every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can also watch the show on ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, and CW stations across the United States. And in Canada, you can watch it on SaskTel, and you can watch it on CHEK Czech in British Columbia, in beautiful Vancouver. And you can also watch it if you're in Saskatchewan like me. You can also watch it on Fox Rochester. So, yeah. So please do subscribe. It really does help me out. I like just kind of being able to come on like this and talk, which is nice. And I'm gonna make this a little bit more permanent, shall we say? And it's nice to have a decent audio quality. So have a good one, and I will see you very, very soon.